The HOA president looked me dead in the eye and said, "People like you don't belong in a community like this," while I stood at my fishing spot, the same one I'd claimed for 15 years, holding a ridiculous $500 citation. There I was, tackle box at my feet next to the old oak tree where I always tied my extra line, getting slapped with a fine for unauthorized recreational activity. This is where Sarah and I had our Sunday morning dates, where I scattered her ashes 2 years ago. Victoria Ashworth threatened daily penalties until I comply. The morning mist still carried that familiar scent of wet pine, but now it reeked of injustice. What would you do if some power-hungry Karen tried to ban you from your one sacred place after losing everything? Stick around because what happens next is absolutely nuclear. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'm mapping HOA tyranny across America. By the end of this story, I bought that entire lake and banned Victoria and her whole corrupt board from ever setting foot on it again. My name's Marcus Dalton, and I'm 52 years old, a union electrician who moved to Willowbrook Commons 15 years ago when this place was still advertised as a rustic fishing community for working families. Back then, you could buy a decent 3-bedroom for under $200,000, and the developer specifically marketed our 200-home subdivision around this gorgeous, natural, spring-fed lake. The community was different then. Genuine working folks, young families, retirees who'd earned their peace. You'd see kids learning to cast lines every weekend while their parents grilled burgers and shared cold beers. The air carried the wholesome scent of charcoal smoke mixing with pine needles, and neighbors actually knew each other's names. Sarah and I made Sunday morning fishing our sacred tradition. I can still hear that satisfying click whir of my vintage pen reel, the same one she bought me for our 10th anniversary. The morning air always carried that perfect blend of wet pine and fish scales, and we'd sit by the old oak tree in comfortable silence, watching mist rise off the water while our bobbers danced in the gentle current. The rough bark under my palm felt like home, and Sarah would always pack thermos coffee that steamed in the cool dawn air. After Sarah passed from cancer 2 years ago, that lake became my lifeline. Every sunrise brought the familiar crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked our old path, tackle box in hand. The scent of dew on pine needles reminded me of her laugh, and I'd scattered some of her ashes by our tree because it felt right. Our happiest place should hold a piece of her forever. But everything started shifting about a year ago when property values began climbing. Suddenly, our quiet community attracted attention from wealthy retirees and remote workers seeking lakefront charm at affordable prices. Houses that sold for $200,000 in 2009 were now pushing $400,000, and the new residents brought different expectations. Enter Victoria Ashworth, the perfectly polished nightmare who bulldozed into our HOA presidency 8 months ago. This woman relocated from Connecticut after selling her pharmaceutical sales management company, and she had big plans for our quaint little community. She's 58, never appears without her signature white blazer and omnipresent clipboard, and immediately purchased the most expensive property available, 4,200 square feet of Connecticut smugness overlooking the lake's prime North Shore real estate. Victoria campaigned on property value enhancement, but her real agenda was systematic gentrification. She wanted to transform our blue-collar fishing community into some exclusive country club paradise. The smell of her expensive perfume seemed to contaminate every HOA meeting, drowning out the natural pine scent that had always defined our neighborhood's character. The first attack came on a crisp Tuesday morning in early spring. I walked down to my usual fishing spot carrying my tackle box and found brand new signs posted everywhere. Lake access, board members only. My heart dropped as I touched the laminated prohibition notice now decorating our old oak tree, the same tree where I'd carved Sarah's initials during our 5th anniversary celebration. Victoria materialized within minutes like some corporate vulture flanked by 2 board members I barely recognized, recent transplants who'd moved here within the past year. Her smile could have frozen the lake solid in July. "This isn't some public fishing hole, Mr. Dalton," she announced, her eyes scanning me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "We're cultivating a more selective atmosphere. Recent beautification initiatives require restricting access to preserve our aquatic ecosystem for appropriate residents." The way she emphasized appropriate made my blood boil. This wasn't about environmental protection. This was about class warfare. about some privileged outsider deciding our working-class community needed her version of improvement. When I tried explaining that I'd been fishing here since 2009, that this exact spot held my deceased wife's memory, Victoria just produced her thick binder of newly created regulations. The sharp snap of her clipboard pen echoed across the water as she wrote my citation: $500 for unauthorized recreational activity plus $50 in administrative fees. "Sentiment doesn't override community property law," she said with ice-cold dismissal. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a less exclusive neighborhood, Mr. Dalton." Standing there with that ridiculous citation, watching Victoria's heels click away across the dock planks, I knew this was just the beginning. Sure enough, 3 days later, a certified mail truck rumbled up my driveway with the kind of thick envelope that screams, "legal trouble." The driver apologized as I signed for it. Even he looked embarrassed delivering what was obviously harassment mail. Victoria's follow-up letter was a bureaucratic masterpiece of intimidation. Not only did she demand immediate payment of the $500 fine, but she'd tacked on another $50 in administrative processing fees that apparently materialized from thin air. The real kicker? She'd scheduled a compliance inspection of my property for the following Tuesday, citing potential community standard violations requiring immediate professional assessment. She was systematically weaponizing the HOA rulebook against me, assuming I was just some broken-down widower who'd roll over and pay up. But that morning, as the smell of fresh coffee brewing in my kitchen mixed with something else, pure determination, I decided Victoria had picked the wrong fight. I chose to combat her bureaucracy with better bureaucracy. Thursday morning found me at the county courthouse requesting copies of original subdivision plat maps. Betty, the friendly records clerk who remembered Sarah from her hospital volunteer work, helped me navigate the maze of filing cabinets. "Honey, you looking for something specific?" she asked as I spread decades-old documents across the worn wooden table. The musty smell of aged paper and old ink filled the record storage room as I photographed page after page with my phone. My hands grew dusty, handling documents that hadn't seen daylight in years, but I kept digging. That's when I struck absolute gold. The original 1987 developer agreement, preserved in black and white like a constitutional amendment. The lake was specifically deeded as common area for all residents' recreational use, including but not limited to fishing, boating, and family activities. My electrician buddy Tony had always told me, "When someone's trying to screw you with paperwork, Marcus, fight back with better paperwork." He was right. Victoria's new restrictions weren't just unfair. They were completely illegal under the founding documents she'd sworn to uphold. Armed with legal ammunition that would make any property attorney jealous, I spent that weekend crafting a formal response letter citing specific deed language and demanding immediate reversal of all fines. The satisfaction of building an airtight case reminded me why I loved electrical work. Finding the right connection always makes everything light up perfectly. Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. sharp, I hand-delivered my legal response to Victoria's front door. She appeared in her bathrobe and slippers, grabbing her newspaper, looking decidedly less intimidating without her signature white blazer and makeup armor. The satisfying weight of those legal papers in their manila envelope felt like justice itself in my hands. Her nuclear reaction came within 24 hours and revealed just how rattled she really was. Victoria called an emergency board meeting, officially labeling me a hostile resident who threatens community harmony and property values. The meeting minutes, which I immediately requested under state sunshine laws, showed she'd proposed enhanced security measures to protect residents from continued disruption by problem individuals. But here's where Victoria made her first catastrophic mistake. She escalated to private security contractors. Within days, a professional security company truck appeared in our neighborhood like we were some gated community in Beverly Hills. She'd hired actual guards to patrol the lake area with specific written instructions to cite Marcus Dalton for any presence near the water. The fresh concrete smell from their new camera post footings told me Victoria was playing for keeps, not just harassment. These weren't random security cameras. They were strategically positioned to monitor my usual fishing spots with the precision of a military surveillance operation. But Victoria's arrogance created an unexpected opportunity that she never saw coming. Those security boots crunching on gravel every hour on the hour caught the attention of other residents. Mrs. Smith, the elderly widow 2 doors down, quietly mentioned she missed seeing me fish. It reminded her of her late husband's morning routine. Young Jake from Oak Street told me his kids kept asking where the nice fishing man went and when he'd come back. Victoria was inadvertently advertising her tyranny to the entire community, and people were starting to notice the heavy-handed tactics. Then she doubled down with what I can only call the inspection ambush. Her brother-in-law, conveniently employed as a city code enforcement officer, showed up unannounced, citing me for excessive garden hose storage and unauthorized deck staining. Two perfectly normal garden hoses hanging on my garage wall and some routine deck maintenance suddenly became municipal violations worth $300 in additional fines. The citations were obviously manufactured harassment, but they revealed Victoria's true strategy: death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. She was systematically corrupting every available government authority, hoping to exhaust my will to fight through pure administrative overwhelm. The metallic scratch of their official clipboards and the cold efficiency of their citation books felt like an invasion of everything Sarah and I had built together in this community. That evening, sitting on my back porch with a cold beer, listening to the familiar evening sounds of our neighborhood, I realized something crucial. Victoria assumed she was dealing with a grieving widower who'd eventually break under pressure. She had no idea she'd just declared war on a union electrician with 15 years of community roots and absolutely nothing left to lose. Victoria wasn't content with just harassing me. She wanted to eliminate fishing from our community forever. Within a week of receiving my legal letter, she launched a full-scale propaganda campaign, going door-to-door with glossy petitions supporting her lake preservation initiative. The aggressive sound of her knocking echoed through neighborhoods every evening, accompanied by her rehearsed speech about how fishing disturbs sensitive wildlife ecosystems and creates unsightly conditions that dramatically lower property values. Her pitch was pure manipulation, targeting newcomers who'd paid premium prices and wanted to protect their investments. She painted fishing as some hillbilly activity that attracted undesirable elements to our refined community. The smell of her expensive perfume seemed to linger on every doorstep she contaminated with lies about environmental protection and community standards. But I wasn't sitting idle while she played politician with our neighborhood's future. I started fighting back with something Victoria never expected from a blue-collar electrician: methodical intelligence gathering that would make a private investigator jealous. My buddy Frank from the union had dealt with corrupt contractors before and taught me the golden rule: paper trails always expose thieves if you know where to look. Every HOA meeting, every financial report, every piece of correspondence was technically public record under state sunshine laws. So I started requesting everything with the persistence of someone tracing electrical shorts. What I discovered in those late-night document reviews made my hands shake with pure rage. Victoria had been systematically looting our community funds for months. She'd been paying herself $200 monthly as an administrative consulting fee, money that was supposed to fund actual community maintenance like road repairs and landscaping. Even worse, I found over $3,000 in payments to landscape consulting companies that existed only on her expense reports. When I tried calling the phone numbers listed, they were either disconnected or answered by confused people who'd never heard of landscaping. I spent countless hours at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold as I documented every fraudulent transaction with the same meticulous precision I used when wiring complex electrical panels. The paper rustled under my fingers as I built an airtight case of financial misconduct that would make any prosecutor smile. Meanwhile, Victoria's petition drive was backfiring spectacularly and revealing the true scope of her tyranny. I quietly approached families she'd previously targeted, and the horror stories started flowing like water through a broken dam. Jake revealed his $300 fine for leaving kids' bikes on the front lawn. Apparently, children's toys violated newly created aesthetic standards. Mrs. Smith got cited for having a beige mailbox instead of the freshly mandated white ones. Dorothy, our retired teacher, was slapped with violations for planting non-conforming colored roses in her own carefully maintained garden. The pattern was crystal clear: systematic targeting of anyone who didn't fit Victoria's Connecticut Country Club vision of suburban perfection. She was essentially conducting ethnic and class cleansing through bureaucratic harassment, one citation at a time. But here's where Victoria made a crucial tactical mistake that handed me pure investigative gold. She dramatically expanded the private security operation throughout our entire neighborhood. Those guards were now patrolling our streets like we lived in some authoritarian police state, and their constant intimidating presence was annoying everyone, not just me. The satisfying crunch of boots on gravel became our neighborhood's new soundtrack of oppression, echoing at all hours as guards made their rounds with clipboards and citation books ready. But when I ran a simple business license search at the county office, I discovered something that made my electrician's heart sing. The security company was owned by Victoria's nephew, Danny, a 28-year-old with no prior security experience. Family nepotism funded directly with community money. That was definitely going in my rapidly expanding evidence file of corruption and conflicts of interest. I decided to consult Jerry, my attorney friend from the Electrical Contractors Union, over coffee and pie at Murphy's Diner downtown. Jerry specialized in property law and had seen HOA corruption cases before. He explained something that changed my entire strategy. Selective enforcement can completely void their authority, Marcus. If they're systematically targeting specific residents while deliberately ignoring identical violations by board members and their allies, that constitutes pure discrimination under state law. The coffee tasted better as Jerry continued. Document the enforcement patterns, prove the bias, and you can potentially invalidate their entire rule book and force new elections. Armed with this crucial legal insight, I filed formal complaints with the State Real Estate Commission, demanding complete financial disclosure of all HOA records for the past 2 years. State law required disclosure within 10 business days, but Victoria immediately started stalling and obstructing, claiming records were currently being audited by accounting firms that apparently didn't exist when I tried to verify their credentials. Her desperate delays and obvious obstruction just provided more evidence of cover-up behavior and consciousness of guilt. Then came Victoria's nuclear financial option, a special assessment vote for emergency lake maintenance. And she announced at a hastily called meeting that every household would need to pay an additional $2,000 to restore critical ecosystem balance and prevent environmental disaster. The community center reeked of desperation and fear sweat despite her layers of expensive perfume. The real purpose was obvious. Victoria needed $400,000 to fight my mounting legal challenges and potentially cover her embezzlement tracks before state investigators arrived. But residents weren't buying her environmental hysteria anymore. Victoria's desperation was showing, and desperate people always make the biggest mistakes. Her next move proved she'd completely abandoned any pretense of legitimate authority. She launched a full-scale character assassination campaign that would have impressed Joseph McCarthy himself. Within days of the failed special assessment vote, carefully orchestrated whispers started circulating that I was mentally unstable since Sarah's death and potentially dangerous to neighborhood families. The rumors were surgically crafted for maximum damage. Victoria told the Hendersons that my fishing gear attracted transients and drug dealers who posed threats to their teenage daughter's safety. She whispered to the Patels that my obsessive behavior around the lake made female residents genuinely uncomfortable during evening walks. At the Johnsons' weekend barbecue, she suggested my grief had transformed into unhealthy fixation that required professional intervention before someone got hurt. The smell of malicious gossip seemed to contaminate every neighborhood gathering, every casual mailbox conversation, every friendly wave between longtime neighbors who'd previously known and respected me. Victoria was systematically poisoning the community relationships Sarah and I had spent 15 years carefully building through volunteer work, neighborhood assistance, and simple human kindness. But Victoria had finally pushed too far, and I was ready with documentation strategies she never anticipated from a supposedly broken widower. I started recording every interaction with board members, perfectly legal in our one-party consent state, something Jerry had emphasized during our legal strategy consultations. My phone captured Victoria's increasingly unhinged threats, her explicit admission of targeting problem residents, and her detailed discussions of financial retaliation against anyone who dared oppose her authority. I also installed professional-grade security cameras around my entire property perimeter, capturing every citation delivery, every intimidating security patrol, every act of bureaucratic harassment in crystal-clear, high-definition detail. The soft electronic whir of hard drives constantly storing evidence became my evening soundtrack of preparation for the comprehensive legal war ahead. Each night, I sat at Sarah's old antique writing desk, creating detailed incident logs with precise timestamps, reliable witness names, exact conversation quotes, and supporting photographic evidence. The familiar scratch of pen on legal pad paper became my meditative ritual, building an ironclad documentation case, one carefully recorded violation at a time. Meanwhile, my deep financial investigation was uncovering fraud schemes that went far beyond simple community fund embezzlement. Victoria wasn't just stealing HOA money. She was actively manipulating neighborhood property values through coordinated deception that bordered on criminal conspiracy involving multiple real estate professionals. I discovered she'd been systematically telling prospective home buyers that lake access was permanently restricted to board members only, artificially inflating property values through blatant misrepresentation of actual community amenities and legal rights. Those glossy real estate brochures featuring stunning lake photography with private waterfront access and exclusive recreational privileges captions were pure false advertising designed to extract premium purchase prices from completely unsuspecting families. But here's where my investigation struck absolute investigative gold. Victoria had been splitting artificially inflated sales commissions with complicit real estate agents who actively helped perpetuate these profitable lies to maximize their own earnings. The paper trail was absolutely devastating. Detailed email chains between Victoria and Century 21 agent Patricia Wells discussing strategic presentation narratives, value enhancement marketing, and commission adjustment agreements that clearly documented coordinated fraud affecting multiple recent home sales transactions. The musty smell of printed bank records, email evidence, and financial documents filled my spare bedroom as I methodically assembled documentation that could realistically put Victoria in federal prison for wire fraud, conspiracy, and interstate commerce violations. Victoria's response to my growing organized resistance was her most personally vicious escalation yet. She initiated formal foreclosure proceedings against my property, claiming I owed $2,800 in accumulated community fines and ongoing administrative penalties. The thick certified mail envelope containing legal foreclosure documents felt like a physical assault on everything Sarah and I had built together over 15 loving years. The foreclosure notice threatened to place permanent liens on my home and force an immediate sheriff's sale to recover community damages and mounting legal costs. Victoria was literally attempting to steal my house through weaponized legal proceedings, betting that complete financial devastation would permanently crush my will to fight before I could expose her extensive criminal enterprise to state authorities. That quiet evening, sitting alone on my back porch where Sarah and I used to plan our retirement dreams, the distant sound of that mail truck driving away felt like funeral bells tolling for our shared memories and everything we'd worked to protect. But Victoria had made one catastrophic strategic miscalculation in her escalating war against me. She assumed I was fighting this increasingly complex battle completely alone without allies or community support. Time to prove her absolutely wrong by calling in the cavalry. I organized what we secretly called the Willowbrook Residents Association, a shadow coalition directly opposing Victoria's reign of bureaucratic terror. Dorothy, Jake, Mrs. Smith, former City Councilman Bob, and 8 other systematically targeted families began meeting in my garage every Thursday evening, sharing war stories over strong coffee and plotting our comprehensive counter-offensive with military precision. Our collective investigation revealed corruption so systematic it shocked even my cynical electrician's heart, and Dorothy's innocent question about lake ownership was about to change everything forever. Dorothy's question about actual lake ownership sent me straight back to the county courthouse the next morning, but this time I dug deeper than community records. I went hunting for the original property history dating back to the 1800s. Betty, the records clerk who'd become my unofficial research partner, helped me navigate the maze of historical deed transfers, railroad grants, and municipal property acquisitions that most people never bother investigating. "You're looking for something specific, aren't you, honey?" she asked, watching me spread century-old survey maps across the wooden research table. The musty smell of aged paper and old ink filled the record vault as I photographed documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. That's when I found the smoking gun that changed everything. The lake didn't belong to our HOA at all. It never had. The original 1940s deed showed the property belonged to the defunct Pennsylvania Railroad Company, which went bankrupt during the economic collapse of 1982. When railroads failed, their assets typically reverted to state ownership through abandoned property laws, something I'd learned during my electrical work on government projects. But here's where the bureaucratic magic happened. The state sold the lake to a private investor named Thomas Morrison in 1995 for back taxes, but the paperwork was never properly filed with the county. Morrison died in 1998, and his estate went into probate hell for 7 years. The lake property just disappeared into legal limbo. The smooth, worn pages of the state administrative code book felt like treasure maps under my fingers as I traced the ownership vacuum. For 30 years, nobody had actually owned that lake. The HOA had been managing common area property they'd never legally controlled. The developer who built our subdivision had assumed ownership but never secured proper title, and Victoria had been protecting something that belonged to nobody. My heart pounded as I calculated the financial implications. State policy for abandoned property was brutally simple. Public auction after 30-day legal notice, with minimum bid set at accumulated back taxes owed. I found the assessment records. Total back taxes on the 12-acre lake parcel was exactly $4,200 over 30 years. I had $4,847 in my savings account, including the remainder of Sarah's small life insurance policy that I'd been saving for emergency repairs. The metallic smell of coins filled my kitchen as I emptied our old change jar, counting every penny that might make the difference between victory and defeat. The beauty of the situation was almost poetic. Victoria could ban me from property the HOA didn't own, she couldn't void fishing rights that were never legally restricted, and all her security cameras were illegally installed on land that belonged to the state of Pennsylvania. But timing would be everything. I quietly submitted the auction bid paperwork, requesting the minimum 30-day legal notice period. The auction was scheduled for Thursday, October 15th, exactly 1 day after Victoria's planned Marcus Dalton expulsion vote that she'd been promoting as her final solution to the fishing problem. Betty helped me understand the auction process. Legal notices would appear in the classified section of the county legal newspaper, the kind of tiny print publication that maybe 50 people in the entire county actually read. Most incredible real estate deals happened because nobody knew they were available. I asked Dorothy to handle the actual bidding while I stayed hidden to maintain the element of surprise. We scheduled a property survey for Friday morning and arranged immediate deed recording within 24 hours of purchase to prevent any legal challenges Victoria might attempt. The satisfying thunk of the rubber stamp on my auction application felt like Sarah approving the plan from wherever she was watching. This wasn't just about fishing rights anymore. This was about justice, community ownership, and stopping a tyrant who'd forgotten that real power comes from the people you serve, not the rules you manipulate. Wednesday evening, sitting at our old kitchen table reviewing the final auction paperwork, I could almost hear Sarah's laugh echoing through our house. She'd always loved David versus Goliath stories, especially when David had better legal research and the element of complete surprise. Victoria thought Thursday would be her victory celebration. She had no idea it would be the day she lost everything she'd worked to steal. The countdown to justice had officially begun. The next morning, I called Jerry at 7 a.m. sharp. "I need a legal team and I need them fast," I told him, explaining the auction discovery that could change everything. Jerry's excitement was contagious. He immediately recruited Maria Santos, a property law specialist from the state capitol who'd handled similar cases involving abandoned municipal assets. The conference call speakerphone crackled with strategic energy as we assembled what Jerry called the most interesting legal challenge of my career. Maria brought in David Kim, an environmental lawyer who specialized in water rights and conservation compliance. We needed to ensure that buying the lake wouldn't trigger state environmental assessments that could delay or complicate the purchase. David explained that private lake ownership often required liability insurance and recreational use permits, but nothing that couldn't be arranged within our 30-day window. The scratch of legal pads and the rustling of property law textbooks filled Jerry's office as we built our comprehensive strategy. Meanwhile, I was running a secret fundraising campaign that would have impressed any political organizer. Door-to-door conversations with trusted neighbors raised an additional $2,100 for bid security. Elderly retirees contributed from coffee can savings. Young families pooled money from kids' piggy banks. And even Mrs. Smith offered her entire Social Security check to help stop that terrible woman. The smell of charcoal smoke and fried catfish filled the community center parking lot as Jake organized what looked like an innocent neighborhood fish fry, but was actually a covert fundraising operation. Families brought folding tables and camping chairs, kids ran around with fishing poles, and adults quietly slipped $20 and $50 bills into an old tackle box while discussing community improvements. By Sunday evening, we'd raised enough additional funding to bid up to $7,500, well above any reasonable competition for abandoned property that nobody else knew was available. I spent hours researching lake management requirements, studying liability insurance options, and learning about conservation easements that could protect the property from future development pressure. My kitchen table disappeared under stacks of environmental regulations, property management guides, and recreational use permitting requirements. The soft rustle of government pamphlets became my evening soundtrack as I prepared for responsibilities I'd never imagined. David helped me understand that private lake ownership included water rights, but state environmental laws still applied to any commercial activities. If I wanted to operate fishing guide services or charge admission fees, I'd need proper licensing and liability coverage. The good news was that community recreational use required minimal regulation. I could allow neighborhood fishing without bureaucratic complications. Our intelligence operation was working perfectly. Dorothy infiltrated every HOA board meeting as a concerned resident, reporting back on Victoria's increasingly paranoid behavior and desperate financial situation. She discovered Victoria was planning a massive victory celebration at the community center for Thursday evening, complete with champagne and architectural presentations for her planned executive fishing club improvements. Mrs. Smith monitored the security guard schedules and patrol patterns, timing their routes to help us avoid unnecessary confrontations during our planning phase. Her detailed notes revealed that guards were deliberately avoiding the actual lake area. They were only intimidating residents on public sidewalks and community spaces. I contacted Mike Reynolds, the local newspaper reporter who covered municipal government meetings. Mike had been investigating HOA corruption complaints throughout the county and was fascinated by our property rights angle. I provided background documentation on Victoria's financial misconduct and selective enforcement patterns, setting up a potential interview for Friday morning. The day after auction results would be public record. The notebook pages flipped rapidly as Mike took detailed notes about constitutional property rights, community self-governance, and the dangers of unchecked HOA authority. He promised front-page coverage if our legal strategy succeeded. Financial logistics required military precision. I liquidated my remaining investment accounts, closed redundant bank accounts, and arranged cashier's checks for maximum possible bid amounts. The crisp feel of certified bank checks and fresh currency felt substantial in my hands. This was Sarah's life insurance money and 15 years of careful savings, but I knew she'd approve of the investment in justice. I studied auction procedures until I could recite them from memory, researched payment requirements and deed recording processes, and arranged immediate liability insurance effective the moment of purchase. Dorothy would handle the actual bidding to maintain operational security, while I waited at Jerry's office to provide legal support if complications arose. Operational security was crucial. We scheduled property surveys for Friday morning, arranged deed recording within 24 hours of purchase, and prepared immediate conservation easement documentation to prevent future development challenges. The satisfying snap of 3-ring binders organizing our legal documents felt like loading ammunition for the battle ahead. Thursday morning, I visited Sarah's grave carrying fresh flowers and our complete battle plan. Sitting on the marble bench overlooking the valley where she'd scattered, I explained how we were about to turn Victoria's greed into community victory. The morning dew carried that familiar scent of possibility and justice. "This one's for both of us, sweetheart," I whispered, feeling her presence stronger than ever. Time to show this neighborhood what real community leadership looks like. Victoria was already celebrating her victory before the battle had even begun. Wednesday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as a professional photographer arrived at her house, documenting what she called the successful restoration of community standards. The satisfying click whir of his expensive camera captured Victoria posing beside the lake, with her arms spread wide like she was some environmental savior instead of a petty tyrant. By noon, a truck arrived delivering new signage that made my blood boil. "Private lake, authorized residents only, violators will be prosecuted." The heavy hammering of fence posts around the lake perimeter echoed across our neighborhood like gunshots, each strike driving home Victoria's message that she owned our community now. She'd even scheduled a wine and cheese reception for Thursday evening to celebrate what she called successful community preservation efforts. The printed invitations, hand-delivered to her supporters, featured glossy photos of the lake with text about protecting property values through decisive leadership. The expensive cardstock felt smooth between my fingers when Dorothy showed me her copy. Victoria was literally throwing a party to celebrate destroying my life. But while Victoria was planning her premature victory celebration, I was making final preparations for the auction that would change everything. The morning of her expulsion vote, I deliberately stayed away from the community center, saving my energy for Thursday's real battle. Dorothy attended the meeting to document violations and reported back that only Victoria's closest allies showed up. Her manufactured community support was evaporating. The smell of fresh coffee and nervous energy filled Jerry's office as we reviewed auction paperwork one final time. Maria had prepared backup documentation for any legal challenges Victoria might attempt, while David had environmental compliance forms ready for immediate filing. Everything depended on maintaining operational security until the moment of purchase. Meanwhile, Victoria was conducting her own media manipulation campaign that revealed just how delusional she'd become. She contacted Channel 8 News about community standing up to disruptive resident, positioning herself as some brave defender of family safety and property values. She claimed my fishing activities attracted transients and drug dealers who threatened children playing in the neighborhood. But her media strategy backfired spectacularly when reporter Jessica Martinez started asking pointed questions about HOA financial transparency and selective enforcement patterns. Jessica had covered municipal corruption before and immediately recognized the signs of abuse of authority. The scratching sound of her pen taking notes grew more intense as Victoria's answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory. The community tension was reaching a breaking point that everyone could feel. Neighbors split into visible factions, Victoria's wealthy supporters displaying new community standards yard signs while Marcus allies quietly removed HOA promotional materials from their property. Anonymous threatening letters appeared in pro-Marcus mailboxes, written on expensive stationery that smelled like Victoria's signature perfume. Security guards increased their patrol frequency to every 30 minutes, photographing anyone they considered suspicious activity. The constant crunch of boots on gravel created an atmosphere of intimidation that was backfiring among families who'd moved here for peace and quiet. Even Victoria's supporters started complaining about the police-state environment she'd created. That's when I realized Victoria didn't even know the auction was happening. Her complete focus on Thursday's expulsion vote proved she had no idea that state bureaucracy was about to make her entire HOA authority irrelevant. She was celebrating victory in a battle that didn't matter while missing the war that would determine everything. Victoria's overconfidence reached absurd levels when she started planning permanent improvements for her imaginary exclusive fishing club. She ordered architectural surveys for a members-only gazebo and private dock that would cost $60,000 in community funds. The glossy architectural plans spread across her dining room table showed elaborate designs for facilities that would never be built. She'd even started collecting membership deposits from board members who wanted guaranteed access to the new executive fishing areas. 3 people actually gave her $500 each, believing they were purchasing permanent recreational privileges. The deposit checks sat in her personal checking account. More evidence of financial misconduct for our growing criminal case. But the most revealing moment came when 3 longtime board members privately expressed serious doubts about Victoria's increasingly authoritarian methods. Treasurer Bob questioned the legal authority for my expulsion, Secretary Janet worried about personal liability for selective enforcement, and Compliance Officer Rick suggested they needed professional legal advice before proceeding. Victoria's response was swift and vicious. She threatened to remove all 3 from their positions if they didn't support her final solution to the Marcus Dalton problem. Her exact words, according to Dorothy's recording, were, "Anyone not completely committed to community standards can find somewhere else to live." The smell of fear and desperation was stronger than her expensive perfume now. Victoria had isolated herself from even her closest allies, creating the perfect conditions for her complete downfall. Thursday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and the promise of justice. While Victoria prepared for her meaningless expulsion vote, I was getting ready to become her new landlord. The woman who'd tried to steal my peace was about to lose everything she'd worked to control. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that Sarah always loved, and I felt her presence guiding me as I drove to the county courthouse. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp, and I arrived 30 minutes early to watch Dorothy handle the registration process while I stayed inconspicuous in Jerry's rental car across the street. The echoing sound of footsteps in the marble courthouse hallway felt like a countdown to justice. Only 2 other bidders had registered for the lake property auction, which was exactly what we'd hoped for. A land speculator named Craig Hoffman, who specialized in flipping distressed properties for quick profits, and surprisingly, the Regional Environmental Conservation Group that wanted to preserve the lake as a wildlife sanctuary. Neither group had done the deep historical research that revealed the property's true value and significance to our community. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Victoria was hosting her community restoration brunch for major donors and supporters, completely oblivious to the legal earthquake happening downtown. According to Dorothy's inside sources, she was unveiling detailed plans for her members-only fishing pier and lakeside pavilion that would cost the community $80,000 in special assessments. The clinking sound of champagne glasses and expensive pastries filled the community center, while Victoria accepted congratulations for cleaning up neighborhood standards. The irony was delicious. She was literally celebrating her control over property she'd never actually owned. The auction began promptly at 10, with county auctioneer Bill Morrison explaining the property details. 12.4 acres including spring-fed lake and surrounding buffer zone, sold as is for recovery of back taxes owed. The required opening bid was exactly $4,200, the accumulated tax debt over 30 years. The environmental group bid first, offering $5,000 as part of their regional conservation initiative. Craig the speculator immediately countered with $7,500, clearly planning to subdivide and develop the waterfront for maximum profit. Dorothy stayed calm and patient, incrementally raising our bids according to our predetermined strategy. The tension was incredible as numbers climbed past our original budget. Craig pushed his bid to $8,500, apparently his financing limit for speculative purchases. The environmental group made frantic phone calls trying to get authorization above their board-approved maximum of $9,000. When Dorothy calmly bid $9,100, exactly our total available funds including community donations, I held my breath and prayed to Sarah's memory. The environmental group representative apologized but couldn't exceed their budget without formal board approval that would take weeks. The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoing through the courthouse chamber was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 7 for $9,100. Dorothy immediately paid with our cashier's check and received the temporary deed while I arranged immediate recording with the county clerk's office. The official county seal embossed on our ownership documents felt like vindication itself pressed into legal paper. Back at the community center, Victoria was still hosting her victory celebration, completely unaware that the foundation of her entire authority had just crumbled. She was showing guests architects' renderings of the Executive Fishing Club and accepting congratulations for protecting property values through decisive leadership. The expensive catering and floral arrangements probably cost more than our winning auction bid. But reality started intruding when her security guard called with disturbing news. "Ma'am, there's been some unusual activity at the county courthouse this morning." Victoria dismissed his concerns, assuming someone was fighting a parking ticket or contesting a property assessment. Her arrogance was about to become her downfall. I drove directly from the courthouse to the lake, carrying my original fishing gear and the newly recorded property deed. For the first time in months, I sat in my usual spot as the actual legal owner of the water and surrounding land. The familiar scent of pine and possibility now carried an undertone of sweet justice that made my heart sing. Mrs. Smith appeared within minutes carrying a thermos of congratulatory coffee, followed by Jake's kids who wanted to know if they could fish again soon. Dorothy arrived with a knowing grin and folding chairs for the celebration we'd been planning in secret for weeks. The word spread quietly through our supporter network. Marcus had done something amazing, and Victoria's reign of terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. While we sat peacefully by the lake discussing conservation plans and community access policies, Victoria was frantically calling county offices demanding information about suspicious courthouse activity. She learned that property auctions were public record but couldn't identify the successful bidder until deed recording was complete. Her panic was growing, but she still had no idea that the quiet widower with the fishing pole had just become the legal owner of everything she'd tried to steal from our community. The afternoon sun reflected off the water like golden promise as I cast my line into my own lake for the first time. Victoria's world was about to change forever, and she didn't even know it yet. Victoria discovered the truth in the most humiliating way possible, by storming down to the lake with her remaining brunch guests and security guards to personally confront me for trespassing on community property. The angry clicking of her heels across the wooden dock planks announced her approach long before I saw her furious face. She was still wearing her celebration outfit, a pristine white blazer that would soon be stained with the sweat of complete defeat. "Mr. Dalton, you are in direct violation of your community expulsion," she screamed, waving a folder of meaningless paperwork. "Leave this area immediately or face arrest for criminal trespassing." Her voice cracked with the kind of hysteria that comes from losing control of a carefully constructed lie. Behind her stood 6 confused brunch guests who'd expected a victory celebration, not a public confrontation with the neighborhood's supposed problem resident. The smell of expensive champagne and fierce sweat created a toxic combination that seemed to hang in the crisp autumn air. That's when I calmly reached into my tackle box and produced the certified county deed, still warm from the recorder's office. "Actually, Victoria, you're trespassing on my lake now." The official document crackled in the morning breeze as I held it up for everyone to see. "This property was legally auctioned this morning, and I'm the new owner." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went through a rainbow of emotions: confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally, pure terror as the implications sank in. Her security guards immediately stepped back, realizing they were now on private property without permission from the actual owner. "That's impossible!" Victoria shrieked, grabbing for the deed with trembling hands. "This is community property. The HOA owns this lake." But the county recording stamp and official notary seal told the truth her lies couldn't overcome. The commotion drew neighbors from throughout the subdivision, and Dorothy arrived with a folder of supporting documents proving the HOA had never owned the property they'd been managing for 30 years. Mrs. Smith brought folding chairs for the show, while Jake started filming everything on his phone for the neighborhood social media group. Victoria's desperation reached pathetic levels as she threatened lawsuits against everyone involved in this fraudulent conspiracy. She demanded the guards arrest me for theft of community assets and manipulation of government records. But the guards refused, pointing out they had no authority to arrest property owners on their own land. I stood up slowly, feeling Sarah's strength flowing through me, and addressed the growing crowd of neighbors. For months, Victoria has been collecting fines and fees for managing property she never owned. She's been stealing community funds, manipulating property values, and abusing residents with rules that have no legal foundation. The crowd murmured with growing anger as I continued. The HOA has been operating under false authority for decades, and Victoria used that confusion to line her own pockets while terrorizing anyone who questioned her methods. Jessica Martinez from Channel 8 News arrived with her camera crew, having been tipped off by my earlier interview request. She immediately recognized the David versus Goliath story that her viewers would love, and began interviewing neighbors about HOA overreach and property rights violations. Victoria tried to control the narrative, claiming I had manipulated the legal system to steal community property. But when Jessica asked for documentation proving HOA ownership of the lake, Victoria couldn't produce anything except decades-old assumptions and unofficial management agreements. That's when I delivered the announcement that sent Victoria into complete meltdown. Effective immediately, I'm banning former HOA board members who abused their authority from accessing this property. Victoria Ashworth, her nephew Danny, who owns the illegal security company, and her brother-in-law, the corrupt inspector, are permanently prohibited from this lake. The crowd erupted in applause while Victoria screamed threats about lawsuits, criminal charges, and property seizure. But her voice was drowned out by the sound of justice finally being served to someone who'd forgotten that real authority comes from the consent of the governed, not the manipulation of bureaucracy. "All residents are welcome to fish, boat, and enjoy family activities," I continued, feeling the warmth of community support surrounding me. "I'm starting a fishing guide service, and there are educational programs planned for kids who want to learn outdoor skills." Victoria's final humiliation came when I pulled out bolt cutters to remove her illegally installed security cameras. "Funny thing about owning lake property," I said, cutting the first camera cable. "I can charge admission to anyone who wants to trespass on private land." The satisfying snap of wire cutters removing Victoria's surveillance equipment felt like cutting the chains of oppression that had bound our community for too long. Each camera that fell represented another piece of her crumbling authority. Victoria stormed away toward the community center, her heels clicking frantically as she fled the scene of her complete defeat. Car doors slammed as she retreated in humiliated rage, leaving behind the ruins of her dictatorship and a community finally free to govern itself with dignity and respect. The impromptu celebration that followed felt like the neighborhood barbecues Sarah and I used to love, back when our community was about friendship instead of fear. The immediate aftermath was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Victoria's house went on the market within 1 week, with a sold contingent sign appearing faster than anyone thought possible. She couldn't stand living in a community where everyone knew the truth about her corruption and cowardice. The moving trucks that arrived 2 weeks later carried away the last remnants of her failed dictatorship, and the collective sigh of relief from our neighborhood was almost audible. The state investigation into HOA financial irregularities moved quickly once Jessica's news story aired statewide. Victoria's embezzlement scheme unraveled under professional scrutiny, and I recovered $3,200 in stolen community funds through civil restitution. Her nephew's security company folded within a month, and her brother-in-law faced disciplinary action from the city for selective enforcement violations. More importantly, our community began healing from the trauma of authoritarian rule. We formed the new Willowbrook Lake Association through genuine democratic process, with transparent elections and financial accountability that Victoria had never allowed. The focus shifted to conservation, family recreation, and community events that brought neighbors together instead of driving them apart. I kept my promise to expand fishing opportunities for everyone, especially kids who'd been denied access during Victoria's reign. The laughter and splash of children learning to cast lines reminded me why Sarah and I had chosen this community originally. Mrs. Smith started a sunrise fishing club for early risers, and retired teacher Dorothy organized weekend nature walks that educated families about lake ecology and conservation. The social good initiative that meant the most to me was establishing Sarah's Serenity Scholarship for single parents attending trade schools. The first recipient was Maria Rodriguez, a young mother studying renewable energy technology after her husband died in a construction accident. The fishing guide service profits combined with community donations provided $5,000 toward her certification program. The scholarship announcement ceremony took place at the lake on a perfect spring morning, with fresh flowers floating on the water, and Sarah's presence almost tangible in the gentle breeze. Watching Maria accept the award while her 6-year-old daughter played nearby reminded me that justice isn't just about defeating bullies. It's about building opportunities for people who need hope. My personal healing accelerated as the lake became a gathering place for families, elderly neighbors seeking peaceful conversation, and community events that celebrated our shared values instead of enforcing artificial standards. The fishing spot where Sarah and I had shared so many mornings now hosted Sunday afternoon barbecues, children's birthday parties, and quiet moments of reflection for anyone seeking peace. The conservation legacy we established protected the lake's natural beauty while ensuring community access for generations. I placed 80% of the property under permanent conservation easement, preventing future development pressure while maintaining family recreational opportunities. The partnership with state environmental agencies provided water quality monitoring and wildlife habitat protection that enhanced the lake's ecological value. Our story resonated far beyond Willowbrook Commons. The viral social media post, "Man Buys Lake to Defeat Corrupt HOA," generated interview requests from property rights attorneys nationwide, and I appeared on local television as an expert on fighting HOA overreach through legal research. The National Property Owners Association invited me as keynote speaker for their annual conference, where I shared strategies for documentation and community organizing. 3 years later, our annual Freedom Fish Festival attracts families from 6 surrounding counties, celebrating community cooperation, environmental stewardship, and the principle that real authority comes from serving neighbors instead of controlling them. Kids who learn to fish with me now teach their younger siblings, creating traditions that honor both outdoor education and democratic values. The conservation easement provides significant tax benefits while ensuring the lake remains protected from commercial development. Property values increased substantially once actual lake access replaced Victoria's artificial restrictions, attracting new families who appreciate genuine community spirit over manufactured exclusivity. Last month, I received a letter from a desperate homeowner in neighboring county whose HOA was trying to ban vegetable gardens and fine residents for unsightly produce. The envelope felt familiar in my hands. Another community under siege by petty tyrants who'd forgotten that neighborhoods exist to support families, not profit from their misery. Looks like I might need to research some farmland ownership laws next, I told Sarah during my morning visit to her grave, where fresh flowers always bloom and peaceful silence reminds me that justice is worth fighting for. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop the story in the comments below. I love reading about communities that fight back against bureaucratic bullies. And hit that subscribe button because Karen versus Marcus round 2 is definitely going to be epic. Remember folks, sometimes the best revenge is buying the whole damn neighborhood and showing everyone what real leadership looks like.